Okay. Welcome everybody to the 10th annual virtual residency workshop. So we're actually at the introductory and intermediate levels. I'm Henry Neiman. I'm the founder and co-lead, I guess you would say, of the virtual residency. And this is the overview, so I'm going to kind of walk you through the workshop, the history of the virtual residency, and so on, give you some context, set the table, get us started. So, very excited to have you all here. Wow, the number of people in the session tripled in about the last 5 minutes. So, real quick, the web page slides are posted on the web page starting hopefully tonight. I'll be posting the videos on the web page. Um, so the URL is right here. We have Google Docs for all the sessions. Um, if you need to contact us, you can contact my personal email address, or there is a workshop email address, virtualresidency2024 at gmail.com, which forwards to my personal email address. So either way is fine. Zoom, I think everybody here already knows how to use Zoom because you're here, so we're good there. You can do it on your laptop, you can do it on your tablet, you can do it on your phone, you can do it on your supercomputer, although my guess is they frown on that. We post the slides on the web page. I don't guarantee that all the slides will be posted in advance, although I do encourage the speakers to provide the slides in advance where possible. And we will post the streaming video. Mute yourself and turn off your camera so that we're not consuming bandwidth unnecessarily. Um, in order to do the Zoom, of course, you've got to have a Zoom account. I put this in mostly for people who are panicking to try and figure out how to do this. Um, so this is all very straightforward. Again, please mute yourself. And if people are not muted, I'll go in and mute them. If you can't do Zoom proper, you can do it on your phone. There's an audio option in the US and then non-US as well. There's a web page that has a list of non-US phone numbers that you can call. None of it's toll free. Most of us within our own country don't pay a high rate, but and then keep your camera off, keep your mic muted unless you're asking a question. If you're asking a question or making a comment, you're welcome to do that by voice. You're welcome to do that in the chat. Okay, so quick outline. This is an experiment. This is our 10th year doing it, but it's still an experiment. We'll talk about what CI facilitators are. We'll talk about the virtual residency and how it got started. We'll talk about why you can't use the enterprise IT approach to training CI professionals. And then we'll dive into the virtual residency, and we'll also talk about the certification program, the Certified CI Facilitator Training and Development, or CIFTED program. Okay, so this is an experiment. Um, every time we've done this, we've had new sessions and new material. We're always trying new things. Of course, we have new speakers, new moderators, new panelists. You all are the 10th cohort. I feel safe continuing to call this an experiment because the EPSCoR program, for those of you from EPSCoR jurisdictions, the experimental program for the stimulation of competitive research eventually became the established program for the stimulation of competitive research. But I think that took 30 years. So if the federal government can do an experiment for 30 years, I don't see why I can't. And all of us. Oh, Steve, are you still not getting sound? Is anybody else not getting sound? Are you all getting sound? People are getting sound. Okay. So Steve, who's not getting sound, or Steven, who's not getting sound, my recommendation is log out of Zoom and log back in. Thank you, everyone else, for confirming that the sound is good on your end. If you are having audio problems, I'll put this in the chat. If you're having audio problems, log out of Zoom and then log back in. If necessary, reboot your PC. There. Okay, so that should hopefully cover it. I honestly don't know. I guess there is a way to turn on subtitles. I don't know where that control is. Um, but let me do this real quick. I will make um, another co-host, and maybe Horst can figure this out. Horst, I'm going to make you co-host, and if you can figure out
Sounds
how to
good.
turn on,
There is
um,
captioning somewhere, but I haven't used it. I'll see what I
yeah,
can
I
do.
honestly don't know how to turn it on. So, if someone can figure it out, great. Okay, another proof that this is an experiment. Only you can make the virtual residency a success. This is not my thing. This is not OU's thing. This is the community's thing. And we did build the very first workshop back in 2015. We did build it all by ourselves at OU for the most part. But um, we've since then, in fact, immediately after that, we opened it up to the community for two reasons. One, I think it's a lot better if the community decides what it should be, rather than one or a few people deciding what it should be. And number two, I don't see why I should have to do all the work around here. So, my evil scheme is if it's a community thing, then I do less work. So, um, yeah, I don't know how to turn on the auto closed captioning. If somebody knows how to do it, let me know. It may not be something that's available on my account, or maybe it's something that's not available on this particular um, call. So we might not have it today. Maybe we can get it for tomorrow or something. I don't know if I can figure out how to turn it on. Okay, so since only you can make this a success, ask questions, make comments. You can do that both by voice and in the chat. You notice that I've got this in reader mode instead of presenter mode. That way I can have the chat window open. Um, so and if you can send me an email or something with some advice on that, we can get a conversation going. And if you're putting stuff in the chat, it might be moving too fast. Go to settings. I don't have any of those things, so I assume that's on the Zoom web page, not here. So we'll have to deal with that later. Okay. But ask questions, make comments, voice chat, however you want to do it. Volunteer your ideas and experiences. And if you're not a speaker or panelist or panel moderator this year, consider being one next year. And also consider participating in the development of the workshop in the weekly calls that we do. Some of them are for developing the workshop, some of them are for the Sifted program, some of them are for writing papers, but there's a weekly call that we do most of the year. We'll probably take a break for July, but we'll get most of the year we're doing these calls. Okay. So now let's talk about facilitators. Well, so let's start with what is cyber infrastructure, because this is a term that's very popular with the National Science Foundation, but is not necessarily a term that everybody and their dog has heard. Um, so what cyber infrastructure is largely depends on who you ask. If you ask a network engineer, they'll tell you cyber infrastructure is the network. If you ask a supercomputing person, they'll say cyber infrastructure is supercomputers and the network. If you ask a cybersecurity professional, they'll say it's anything that needs cybersecurity. If you ask anyone else, it's whatever their thing is, plus supercomputers, plus the network, maybe also plus cybersecurity. So there is no good answer to what is cyber infrastructure. There is a somewhat formal definition that groups like the National Science Foundation use to define cyber infrastructure, but of course it's all vague and fuzzy, and that's fine, right? Doesn't have to be all that well defined to be a useful term. All right, well, now that we vaguely sense what cyber infrastructure is, and it will never be better than vaguely sense, what's a cyber infrastructure facilitator? Well, these are the professionals who work with users, primarily researchers, but also educators, and I'll use some other phrasing in a little bit, to help them to improve their research or education productivity and aspirations using advanced cyber infrastructure, using advanced computing, data, etc. You hear terms like computing, storage, and networking, and so on and so forth, right? Everybody wants their particular area of expertise to be included. It's commonplace, though by no means universal, for one or a handful of CI facilitators to have responsibility for an entire institution, or even in some cases, multiple institutions. In fact, probably, if not the most common, certainly a plurality, is institutions that have one person responsible for research computing for the entire institution. Why is that? Well, if you go to the top 25 institutions, you may find an army of CI facilitators or CI professionals more broadly, right? Dozens of them. Hundreds is usually limited to big national centers, right? If you go to the Texas Advanced Computing Center or the San Diego Supercomputer Center or the National Center for Supercomputing Applications at the University of Illinois or Pittsburgh Supercomputing Center, these are the big NSF funded supercomputing centers, you're going to find probably hundreds of CI professionals. But if you go to an institutional center, even at the high end, the most you're going to find typically is dozens. Uh, and the problem with the top 25 is there's only 25 of them. So the rest of us have to make do with much smaller research computing organizations. And if you are a less research intensive institution, there's a high probability that your institution has one or fewer research computing professionals responsible for the entire institution or perhaps even multiple institutions. It's quite common. Um, so, um, it, at some institutions, as I said, these are part-time folks. At others, they're full-time folks. There can be an army of them at an institution that has a high amount of research expenditure. Um, in round figures, you're likely to see it be roughly proportional to the institution's annual research expenditure, um, not as a big fraction of the total, but roughly proportional. Um, and these folks come from a lot of different backgrounds: faculty, current or former, postdocs, research staff like research programmers, research scientists, IT professionals, including from the enterprise side, and students, both graduate and undergraduate. And with the IT professionals coming from enterprise IT, this is quite common, particularly at less research intensive institutions where the
Hi, this is Rita.
institution will
Really,
decide they
would you
need
please call
research
me back
computing.
so we could get my
Um,
motor in my dishwasher taken care of?
and I
My
am
phone
going
number
to real
is eight
quick
one
do
two
an
three
all
two
mute.
two zero six zero.
There we go. So um, the a comment. Oh, what is enterprise IT? And I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes, Eric. I'm glad you asked. Sorry, in my next talk, excuse me. But enterprise IT is the stuff that serves the entire institution that is not specific to research computing. So that would be classroom stuff, administrative stuff, the campus network, the firewalls, the all of the web-based stuff that your institution provides for things that are not specific to research, and so on and so forth. And I've actually got a section on that in the second talk today. So I'll go into much more detail. I recognize what I've said is a little bit vague. Thank you for that question. But on the enterprise IT side, what will often happen at less research intensive institutions is the institution will decide we need research computing because it's core to our ability to do research, which is part of our mission, less so than in a highly research intensive institution. And they'll say to the CIO, take care of that. And the CIO will go, okay, Janet, you're now in charge of research computing. And Janet will go, hamana, 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 because Janet will know nothing at all about research computing or research. That doesn't have to be a barrier because of us doing this here. Okay. So now, in the context of CI professionals, we talk about what are called the five facings. And this terminology, I think, goes back to about 2016 or so. There were a series of workshops and meetings sponsored by the National Science Foundation on CI professionals. And we kind of came up with this as a way to capture essentially the sorts of roles that CI professionals have. And by the way, a person can have many of these roles. They don't have to have just one. So researcher-facing CI professionals, essentially CI facilitators, although there can be other areas as well. For example, CI research scientists embed much deeper with researchers and research teams than a CI facilitator would, but have a similar kind of role. System-facing, so cluster sysadmins, network engineers, folks like that, people whose primary role or a key part of their role is keeping the lights on, making sure the machines are running and available. Data facing, like a research data librarian. Software facing, so research software engineer, someone who builds research software. Or sorry, develops is probably a better word. And then strategy and policy facing. These are people like me who rattle the tin cup begging for money, like an institutional CI leader, which is the role that I suddenly found myself in 20 some years ago and had to figure out what the job was. So, what is a facilitator not? Well, a facilitator is not necessarily a computer scientist. In fact, I suggest that the overwhelming majority of CI professionals, whether facilitators or other roles, other facings, come from other disciplines than computer science. So computer science is not as common. Henry, are you going to share these slides later? I think they're already posted on the workshop website. I'll put the URL in the chat real quick. Give me just a second. All right, great question. Yes, they should already be there. My slides are there. Ellen's slides are there for the last talk this afternoon. I think Bruce's slides will get there probably during the lunch break. Okay, CI facilitator is not necessarily a system administrator. In fact, I not only have no system-facing role, but I'm utterly incompetent in that area. Years and years and years ago, I went to a workshop about parallel computing, and one of the exercises they had us do was build a little itty-bitty cluster supercomputer out of cast-off desktop systems, and I got 5 minutes in and I broke everything. I don't mean physically, but it was just completely destroyed at the image level, the disk image level. And so I am not competent to do anything system facing, and I don't have root privilege on our machines, and I shouldn't. It also helps that then when a user comes to us and say, "Can I have administrator privileges on the supercomputer?" The team gets to say, "Well, Henry doesn't have administrative privileges on the supercomputer, so no." Okay, facilitator is not necessarily a current or former researcher. As I mentioned, quite a few of them are former or even current enterprise IT folks that have little or no research background. That's not at all uncommon. But on the other hand, they're not necessarily an IT professional. So quite a few of them are current or former researchers who have no formal IT role prior to becoming a facilitator. And they're definitely not necessarily an enterprise IT professional. Some of them are, and some of them have no background in that whatsoever, which leads to a lot of conflicts. And we'll see why in the next talk. I'm not going to talk about that in this talk. Okay. Well, what do CI facilitators do? Um, so essentially, we work with both STEM and non-STEM researchers, scholars, and creatives. A lot of folks in humanities object to the term research to refer to what they do. They prefer the term scholarship. And the folks in, for example, fine arts would prefer to what they prefer to refer to what they do as creative activity. So we want to be careful in our terminology depending on the audience we are talking to, and that'll also come up in the next talk. But the goal is to advance the computing intensive and data intensive aspects of their research or scholarship or creative activity. So what would be examples of how CI facilitators do that? They adapt research workflows to CI resources like supercomputers and clouds and storage systems and teach how to use these resources in order to advance the computing and data intensive aspects of that researcher's investigations. They bridge the gap between the researchers and the technologists. So, for example, a facilitator is very useful, among other things, in helping researchers understand the technology well enough that between them and the system administrators, they can work stuff out. Now, by the way, a lot of system administrators also have these talents. And so it's not always necessary to have a facilitator bridging that, but it can be valuable in some circumstances. Anticipating new CI needs for research activities that are starting to bubble up. A big one these days is GPUs for machine learning. Very, very, and increasingly popular. We wrote a proposal in 22, and in that proposal, we identified 18 research teams at our institution that were already using GPUs to do machine learning, and 51 teams that aspired to do so. So the demand for GPUs to do machine learning is not just the people who already know how to do it, but the people who want to learn how to do it. Helping researchers who have limited coding experience to design use case specific software and to port that software to whatever the local or some national or regional or statewide platform that that researcher has access to. Because typically, or at least often, the researcher does not have the background to be able to do that on their own. Okay. Teaching research cybersecurity and compliance. More and more, we are hearing from federal research funding agencies and other arms of the federal government that they are increasingly concerned about both cybersecurity and compliance. So, for example, if you have personal health information in your research, you are subject to HIPAA, and you can't run on the same sort of open system that an astronomer or a biologist studying microbes, like a microbiologist, would use. You're going to have things much more locked down. You may be hearing about controlled unclassified information, another example of that. Developing strategies for specific use cases. We like the 80-20 rule, right? Right? 80% of cases can be handled by 20% of the labor. They're normal. And then the other 20% of the cases need a lot more labor because they have some quirky need that is not addressed by the usual approaches. And we don't want those researchers to be out in the cold. Data management is really important. Researchers often have a limited sense of how to deal with data management. Um, Providing and pointing to local, regional, and national training opportunities. So, software carpentry workshops is a great example of that. The now access workshops for things like parallel computing, big data, machine learning, that sort of stuff. Helping researchers figure out what's a good technology solution. So I had two meetings totaling about 2.5, 3 hours just this past Friday with a researcher who needs a specific thing, but there are a lot of different options. And so we spent a lot of time on Zoom together on Friday trying to figure out what's the best option. And then I had some follow-up email with the user and their advisor to try and get a clearer sense of what their needs are. Advocate for researchers, and particularly computing and data intensive researchers, to the central administration, because if the central administration is not hearing that this is important, well, it's expensive. And if it's not important, they'll cut it. So they need to hear that it matters. Helping researchers prepare CI-focused publications, posters, and whatnot. We provide, at my institution, we provide a whole lot of boilerplate text that they can choose to incorporate wholly or in part into their proposals. It's very straightforward. But then they can come to us also with use case specific stuff if they need that. And so that covers that last bullet as well. Okay, so what qualities should CI facilitators have? Well, so this was me and a colleague, James Cuff, who I think now is at MIT. At the time he was at Harvard. We sort of came up with this little diagram that we sketched out on a whiteboard. Um, so if you like people and you like research, you might be well positioned to be faculty, to teach people how to do research. If you like research and you like things, you might be well positioned to be a researcher using those things or doing research about those things. If you like people and you like technology, then you might be good at being a helper in an enterprise IT context. And if you like people, if you like things and you like technology, you might be good being a sysadmin or a network engineer or something like that. But if you live in the middle, where you like both people and things, where you like both technology and research, that's where the facilitators lie, right? If you enjoy helping people, but you find technology fascinating and you like research, this is the job to do. Okay, so who cares about CI facilitators? Well, researchers do because they find us really helpful, and the national leadership does. They recognize the importance of CI facilitators, and they've been putting that into various reports. And I'm not going to spend time quoting. You can go look up the reports. I'm not making this up. They actually think that we are swell, which is great because otherwise we would all be starving in the dark. Here's more. This is from the NSF's Cyber Infrastructure 2030 report. Goes on and on about how important this is. Not going to spend all day on it, but you can read up all this stuff. The NSF CI 2030 report or web page has now been decommissioned, but it's still available on the Wayback Machine, the web archive. So I put the link there. Um, so the next thing is, have we been growing as a profession? And the answer is we have been quite a bit and quite rapidly. I only have data through 2019, not because the data doesn't exist anymore, but because the numbers get so completely out of control that the labor cost of figuring out the number of unique individuals who are CI facilitators is essentially impossible anymore. So when I did this back in 2019, I took the mailing lists of the Campus Champions, the Virtual Residency, and the CARC researcher facing network. And then I had to mush them together so that it was just one instance of each person. So people weren't double and triple counted because I'm on all three of those mailing lists, for example. And these are the numbers that I came up with. Now I tried doing that task. I think it's already 2 years ago, and it was just impossible. So I'm not even trying anymore. I don't know what the numbers are anymore. I probably never will because the labor cost of finding out is not sustainable. Okay, so where did all this come from? Well, way back in the distant mists of 2013, there was a team. It actually started in 2012. There was a team of 13 institutions led by Clemson and University of Wisconsin-Madison was a big leadership player in this. And they submitted a proposal for, I think it was 33.5 million to the NSF to provide facilitators at those 13 institutions over a 4-year period. It was a huge amount of money over a long period of time. And there was advanced networking stuff in it as well. It was a big, big thing. And the NSF came back and said, we'll give you 1/7 of the money for 1/8 of the work. Now, by the way, so we had a couple of extra pieces. One was this virtual residency for teaching people how to be a CI facilitator, because it was about CI facilitators, right? We need to train people, because back then it wasn't a common term. And we had a component about EPSCoR stuff. Um, so when the NSF came back, they said, yeah, no, 2 years instead of 4, 6 institutions instead of 13, and no advanced networking. So phase one did not include my institution. But then the NSF came out with the Campus Cyber Infrastructure program in 2012. And then in 2014, 12 to 13 year. And then in 2014, they added a new sub-program called Campus Cyber Infrastructure Engineer, which is really a network engineering position, but focused on research networking. And that program, everybody and their dog submitted a proposal to that sub-program to try and get a campus cyber infrastructure engineer position because the federal research funding agencies and the NSF in particular hate funding non-researcher salaries. So they rarely do it. I exaggerate, but to first order, that's true enough. They rarely do it because they want to spend their salary money on researchers. They want to spend it on, faculty summer salary and then grad students and postdocs and even undergrads, and sometimes even high school students. They don't really want to spend a lot of money on technicians. And so when they offer to spend money on technicians, you submit a proposal. You give it a shot. So we knew everybody and their dog was going to do this, so we needed a differentiator. Well, what was our differentiator going to be? I went back into the distant mists of my memory, way back in the early 2000s or mid 2000s. I had submitted a proposal to a program that was then called IGERT, Integrative Graduate Education, Research and Training. Now it's called National Research Traineeship. $3 million-ish. I think it was a little over 3 million to teach. I think it was like 18 PhD students at my institution at OU how to do my job, how to be a CI facilitator. And that flamed out 3 times. That failed and failed and failed. So I stopped asking for $3 million for that. Well, a new program came along called Cyber Infrastructure Training Education Advancement and Mentoring, or CI Team, that offered $250,000, 250K. And me and some colleagues put in that same proposal like another 3 times. I think it was 3 more times. Failed, right? But then with this program, I thought, well, why don't we make a miniature version of that? And we'll just do 10% of the budget. So it's a 400K budget to pay someone to be a research networking engineer. We'll carve 10% of that out to create this thing we'll call the virtual residency based on what got rejected out of that Clemson Advanced Cyber Infrastructure Research and Education Facilitators proposal that we got kicked off of when they got the money. So we put their principal investigator on our external advisory committee to make it look legit, and we used a similar name and so on and so forth. And they loved it. Now, so here were the objectives. We had all of the research stuff and all that, but we had this national training regime where we would create this virtual residency to teach people how to be CI facilitators, right? And the reviewers liked it. They liked the virtual residency program. They thought it was really good. They didn't see any problems with that. They did say one thing, and it was in the reviews for the proposal that created the Campus Research Computing Consortium, or CARC, that some of you have heard of or are members of, and I hope many of you join. They did have one caution. They said, we don't want it just to be available to those original 6 institutions. So there's the numbers. The worst we ever did was 91% of the attendees and institutions that participated in a virtual residency workshop, 91%, that was the worst, were not just the original 6 institutions. More commonly, it's been, I think probably the average is about 96%, 97%, somewhere around there. That's been a big success. All right, now, why don't we just train CI professionals the way that we train enterprise IT folks? Because we've got decades upon decades of learning how to do that. So why don't we? Well, it's really an issue of scale. It's an issue of numbers. What works well at the scale of millions or tens of millions does not work well at the scale of thousands. Okay. So in enterprise IT, you've got millions of professionals. In 1970, it was about 500,000, and that represented about 0.5% of the US civilian workforce. By 2014, it was almost 5 million, and that was almost 3% of the US civilian workforce. You can imagine by now it's well over 5 million, but I don't have a report showing numbers. But during that period, the compound annual growth rate had it doubling every 13 years. Now, obviously, that's slower than Moore's Law by quite a bit, but that's a lot faster than lots of other professions, right? So when you've got millions of people, I would guess it wouldn't surprise me if there are more than 10 million computing and IT professionals in the U.S. civilian workforce now. That wouldn't surprise me. I don't know that that's the case, but I certainly wouldn't be surprised. So at that scale, just about every or almost every higher ed institution has some sort of degree program related to a computing or IT area. And they are at the associate's level, bachelor's, master's, PhD. There are certificates at various levels along the way. There are courses at some high schools. I mean, because of the scale, a huge fraction of education institutions teach this topic. And there are also professional development certifications, for CISSP, there's database certifications, there's the Red Hat certified engineer, MCSE, on and on. I mean, all these acronyms, right? An alphabet soup of professional development certifications that you can get. There's enormous resources being devoted to constantly updating everybody's skills because, of course, technology rapidly evolves. And none of this even takes into account the explosive growth of data science programs. Now, every state except Alaska and Wyoming has at least one data science degree or certificate program. Every state except Alaska and Wyoming. Research computing, on the other hand, is at least 3, if not 4, orders of magnitude smaller. It's thousands of professionals instead of millions. So there are no degree programs, there are no certifications, though we're working on that. There's minimal resources for updating your skills. The best we can do is informal education like this, right? That meme of best I can do is informal education. All right, so then the virtual residency, what is it? Well, we teach pre-service and in-service CI facilitators how to do facilitation or how to do it better. And then under that is a hidden secret agenda. All right, so how do we do that? The biggest contributing factor is the annual workshop. This event here is the number one thing we do to help CI professionals, or at least CI facilitators, learn how to do their job or do it better. The University of California system actually adopted this a couple of times and did it for some of their institutions. In fact, all of their institutions about 7 years ago. We do the planning calls. I mentioned those earlier. We'll skip July, but basically starting in August, we'll do a weekly call, partly to plan the virtual residency, partly for SIFTED, the certification program, partly for writing papers. We do an annual meeting at the SC Supercomputing Conference, and then we do apprenticeships. Right now, we're doing a grant running apprenticeship where you learn how to run a project. And before the virtual residency, no one ever had been stupid enough to try and figure out how to teach this stuff. I am stupid enough, so I'm happy and proud that I am this dumb. And so this is ballooned, and it has nothing to do with me anymore now. It's a national community doing it together. And, I really like this apprenticeship thing that we've been doing. We taught people how to write grant proposals, how to write papers. We're now teaching them how to run a project. And basically, I learned this from a colleague of mine who effectively taught me how to write grant proposals by inviting me on as a co-PI and then inviting me to his office to watch him write the proposal while thinking out loud. So I got to see his thought process, how he thought through how to write the grant proposal, how he thought through how reviewers and program officers would react to things. And then I learned how to apply that to my own proposals. And I thought, well, why can't we just duplicate that model? And we did, and it's been a big success. Why do we do the virtual residency? Well, typically, CI facilitators come from, more often than not, a non-CS background. In fact, not always, but almost always, it's a non-CS background. They have strong experience within their discipline, but they haven't been faculty. They may not have been researchers. This is especially true of enterprise IT professionals. Um, Even if they have a strong research background, it probably was just in their own discipline, not in the dozens of disciplines and hundreds of subdisciplines that they need to serve. Because again, at most institutions, you do not have an army of facilitators. You have one to, in fact, part of one to a handful. When we started back in 2015, no one was teaching this stuff. So it kind of fell to us. And back then, if you were learning how to be a CI professional, you had time to do that. When I started in my job, this was back in fall of 2001, no one had any expectations about what it was supposed to be, what I was supposed to be doing. So if I showed up, they were delighted. And I had 5 years to figure out what my job was. Well, nowadays, when you get hired, you have 5 minutes to figure out what your job is. When you get hired, your first day on the job, they expect you to be productive. So you need somewhere to go to learn how to be productive in this way. Okay, so who are we talking about? Well, we've already served 1,558 people from 493 institutions. My goal this year is to get to at least 501 institutions total so that I can start saying over 500 institutions and just leave it at that, and then I don't have to count anymore. Every U.S. state, 4 U.S. territories, including all the EPSCoR jurisdictions, for those of you who are familiar with EPSCoR, plus 19 other countries on every continent except Antarctica. And to be perfectly honest, I despair of Antarctica. So that includes 64 minority serving institutions, 131 non-PhD granting, 124 in every EPSCoR jurisdiction, about 80% of the campus champion institutions. And this is for all of the activities. Almost everyone has participated in the summer workshops, but this includes some people who have participated in activities other than the summer workshops, which is a small group, but not insignificant. We don't know who's attending this week's workshop, but we can say who's pre-registered. There were 334 as of a few minutes before this talk started from 172 institutions in 49 states and territories and 5 other countries. And that includes 33 new institutions. So I think we've got a good shot. We only need 8 more to get us over the hump and be able to say over 500 institutions. Now, not everybody who pre-registered will attend, but that's okay. We'll have a good size attendance, and we'll be able to create more value. And of course, we have people who've attended before coming back, as well as new people. So my guess is we'll get to somewhere between 1,600 and 1,700 total by the end of this week, but that's a guess. Why is it hard to help researchers? Well, the problem is that computing intensive and data intensive research is more and more common, but the fraction of researchers who have that background is smaller and smaller. And in fact, I would suspect that the absolute number of people who come in with that background is smaller and smaller. So there's an applicability issue, right? More disciplines are doing computing and data intensive research than ever before. So, in younger days, it would be physical sciences, engineering. In the late 90s, early 2000s, we started adding biosciences. That became more and more common. Then we started seeing social sciences. Now we see humanities, arts, you name it, right? More and more disciplines have been getting involved. And within any discipline, a higher and higher fraction of the researchers or scholars or creatives are doing computing and data intensive work. And then the machines are getting harder and harder to use. So if you've ever been to either Disney World or Vegas, you notice it doesn't matter how much money you go in with, you come out with nothing. They have figured out exactly how much money they can get from you and exactly how to get every penny they can. And the same principle applies to how hard it is to use computing, and in particular, high performance and large scale computing. It gets harder and harder, and it does that because we are willing to tolerate that in exchange for greater capacity and greater speed. They will give us exactly the amount of pain that we are able to tolerate. So the storage hierarchy has more and more levels to it. And the parallelism not only is more and more, let's say, cores, but also more and more kinds of parallelism. So GPUs, FPGAs, other accelerators, right? All of them add to the complexity of using research computing. So it's getting harder and harder all the time. And then the conceptual distance. So this is where our users are coming from. They think computing is a handheld, right? To them, computing is I tap 3 times to install software, right? Once to open the store, once to pick the application, and once to give it permission to listen to my phone calls, right? That's their mental model of what computing is. In the good old days, in the mid 2000s, they came to us from a Windows or Mac OS laptop background. Those days are over. Now it's a handheld, right? And the problem with things that are easy to use is they don't at all resemble how computing operates at large scale. So at large scale, it's command line, Linux, batch, remote, shared, all of which is the exact opposite of this. The exact opposite. There's no relationship between what they think computing is and what they have to do in order to be successful at large scale. And we get 1 hour to teach them how. 1 hour to get them over that hump. After 1 hour, they lose interest and give up. Okay, now, as it turns out, more and more institutions have on-campus research computing. So 94% of the R1, the Carnegie classification, very high research activity institutions, 94%, all but, excuse me, all but, what is this, 9 of them have on-campus research computing. And several of those 9, they use the on-campus research computing of other institutions in their state. So, for example, the CUNY Graduate Center, which is an R1 part of the City University of New York, uses CUNY College of Staten Island, which is where the CUNY Supercomputing Center is. And College of Staten Island is master's granting, not PhD granting, but it serves all of CUNY. Likewise, for example, if I remember correctly, Utah State uses University of Utah, things like that, right? There's actually only one institution that I'm aware of where their sole strategy, indeed primary strategy, is sending people to commercial cloud. I only know of one R1 where that's true. R2, about a little over half have on-campus research computing. If you look at the U.S. News top national university rankings, 98% of the top 50, 95% of the top 100, 84% of the top 150, and 78% of the top 200 all have on-campus research computing resources. And the U.S. News rankings is a mix of all different kinds of institutions. So it's R1s, R2s, non-PhD granting, you name it. And they don't use that as part of their criteria, as far as I'm aware, for deciding how something ranks. So there are very high ranked, there are top 25 R2s. Okay. Most institutions also have virtual residents. So 100% of the top 25, 98% of the top 50. I'm hoping we change that this week. I'm not going to name the name of the institution. 88% of the top 100, 82% of the top 150, 75% of the top 200. And again, I hope some of this changes. What does parallelism mean? That is such a great question. Parallelism means doing multiple things literally at the same moment. To give a contrast, the following is not parallelism. My kids will watch TV while doing homework, while listening to music, while texting, while talking on the phone with a friend. That is not literally parallelism because they are time slicing. They're shifting their attention. They do a few seconds of homework, then they do a few seconds of watching TV, then a few seconds of writing a text to their friend, and so on and so forth. That's called concurrency, time slicing, but it's not parallelism. Parallelism is when they're literally doing all of those things at the exact same moment. Did that help, Mary Ellen? Excellent. Thank you. All right. And then percent of R1s and R2s that have participated in the virtual residency. Almost all of the R1s have participated in the virtual residency. Almost 2/3 of the R2s. We did an evaluation back in 2020. We published it in 2021. And I want to thank our then evaluators, Lizanne DeStefano and Lorna Rivera. We presented that paper at the PERC 21 conference. And what we found a couple of things. One was the demographics. So women were about 30%. Now, obviously, that's less than the US population by quite a bit, but it's better than all computing and IT occupations and way better than research computing. So the SC conferences, which I think are a pretty good measure of demographics for research computing, or a good enough measure for research computing professionals, not research computing consumers, typically runs about 13 to 14% women. And then on race and ethnicity, the virtual residency was 21% underrepresented minorities. US population is 34%. So again, not all that close, but double, in fact, slightly better than double the percentage of those populations in all computing and IT occupations. We don't have numbers from the SC conference for race and ethnicity, only for women versus men. Does it work? Well, what we found was it worked great. So on a 1 to 5 scale, where 1 meant suck and 5 meant fantastic, the lowest rated session was a 3.9, and the highest rated session was a 4.42. So that's pretty good. So the worst session was a solid B, and the best session was a B plus A minus. Did I get that right? I think that's right. Or nearly an A. Okay. Experience. So what we found with underrepresented minorities for the few sessions that were, or the few measures that were statistically significant from the group as a whole, they were slightly happier. For women, there was only one session that was statistically significantly different, and they did rate it lower, but there were no other statistically significant differences. So this works well for everyone, is a good way to think of it. It works well, and it works well for everyone. So yesterday, so the numbers, what we find is 75 to 80% of people who do this once come back. We actually measure it by institutions, and about 2/3 not only come back and do the same thing again, but they do multiple activities. Now, there's a very big professional ecosystem, and we have a talk tomorrow morning that will talk about some of this. And we encourage you to join. There's a lot of different organizations all over the country, and in fact, all over the world, but most of you I know are from the US. A lot of organizations all over the country that you can get involved in that are making things better. And we would encourage you to continue to be involved with the virtual residency, but also to get involved with these other organizations. Okay, so the workshop this week. So let's do a quick run through on the agenda. We're on Monday. Here's our overview talk. I'll come back after we have a short break, and I'll do a talk on effective communication. And then I think you're done hearing from me until Friday. Everybody else will get a chance. I'll shut up and let other people talk for a while. Then this afternoon, Professor Bruce Mason from OU Physics is going to give a talk on what it's like to be faculty and why faculty are the way they are. Those of you who are faculty already, you already know this, but for many CI professionals, this would be opaque without someone explaining it. And then we'll wrap up today with Ellen Fritz Waters talking about um, the topic of cyber infrastructure user support. It's a very good introduction. Then tomorrow morning, Mike Renfro is going to talk about the cyber infrastructure landscape. So what's out there in terms of both organizations and resources. Then we're going to have a talk and a demonstration about how to do an intake interview, your first meeting with a new researcher, how to find out what it is they need and how you can help them. Then we've got a panel on how to learn and how to teach research computing resources, and then a panel on research data management. Now, the way this breaks out is the talks typically are introductory and the panels typically are intermediate. The difficulty at the intermediate level, honestly, is none of us have enough solid knowledge to do a 75-minute talk about any of these topics. But collectively, we can do that. And so panels have been very, very effective historically in helping people learn this material. All right. Then on Wednesday, we've got a talk from the Cyber Ambassadors Group, which is a sister organization focused on CI facilitators, called Let's Talk, communicating that there's a problem. So how to broach difficult subjects with your researchers. Then a practicum on doing intake interviews. We'll learn how to do intake interviews by doing them, and that comes with badging. So if you do it successfully, you get a badge in the Certified Cyber Infrastructure Facilitators Training and Development Program, and that advances you towards certification. Then we have a panel, what do researchers need from facilitators? And finally, a panel on facilitating cloud computing. And then on Thursday, we've got a panel, what to do after the intake interview and how to build a lasting collaboration with your researchers. Then leading the change, equity and inclusion, and leading with principles, ethics. And then in the afternoon, a couple of intermediate panels, facilitating AI, machine learning, deep learning, and then what I wish I'd known when I started as a CI facilitator. So this is accumulated wisdom from more experienced facilitators. And then finally on Friday, which is a half day, this has been a tradition for a while since we started bumping up against 4th of July weekend. We've been more cautious about this. So we've got reducing barriers to entry for new users. And then we'll end with our traditional stories from the trenches, where we sit around the virtual campfire and tell stories about our experiences in CI facilitation. You can get that agenda right off the webpage, so go there whenever you want, and you can see what's coming up. I'm proud to say we have 57 presenters from 49 institutions all over the country, and many different kinds of institutions, R1s, R2s, non-PhD granting, minority serving, you name it. So on and on and on. I'm not going to read all these names out loud, but we're very grateful to all these folks for volunteering and stepping up. Nobody's getting paid to do this. We're all here as volunteers. And how do we pick them? You know, in past years, we had a lot of complaints about, well, we're hearing from the same people over and over and over. The only way we get people to be speakers and moderators and panelists is we beg and plead and plead and beg on our knees, and eventually some people feel guilty and cave. And so the group we have is the set of people who volunteered, who caved in and said, yes, we'll help. So if you want a broader variety of speakers and panelists, there's a great way to get that. Next year, be one. What are we here to accomplish? We want to learn how to work with researchers who are using cyber infrastructure, how to find them, how to help them, how to be institutional cyber infrastructure leaders, and start thinking about becoming national cyber infrastructure leaders. What are we not trying to do? We're not trying to teach a lot of technical content. There's a lot of technical content training out there. If you want to learn parallel computing, there are plenty of places that'll teach you that. And they do it really well. So it wouldn't make sense for us to spend a lot of time trying to duplicate what they're already doing well. If you want to learn scripting, right? You want to learn how to write shell scripts. Software Carpentries does that brilliantly. You don't need us doing that. Software Carpentries will cover that for you. We recommend you go that direction for that kind of technical content. We have a little bit of technical content, typically most years, but that's not the primary focus. We are here to teach the profession of cyber infrastructure facilitation and ultimately cyber infrastructure leadership. The hidden secret agenda is this. As the baby boomers age out and retire, who's going to fill their shoes? Well, the reality is people my age, people who are in the latter half of their careers, we're going to be dragged kicking and screaming upstairs. It's already happened for a lot of us. Whether we want it or not, that's what's going to happen because we're the only folks who've been around long enough to know how things work, right? But when we get dragged kicking and screaming upstairs, we're going to grab you by the scruff of the collar and we're going to drag you up to the level we were at. We can't keep all this stuff going unless everybody is willing to be dragged up a level every so often, right? The only way this is going to work is if we're all willing to move up. And the only way we're going to be able to move up successfully is if we're helping each other learn how to do the next level job, right? And here's the thing. As people are learning how to do this, again, when I started, I had 5 years to figure out what my job was. You have 5 minutes. So it's on us. We have an obligation to make sure you can learn the job so that when you get started, you can already be successful. That's so important. And remember, you are the cyber infrastructure leaders of tomorrow. Who understands your institution's computing and data intensive research portfolio better than the person who spends all their time with the computing and data intensive researchers? And that's CI facilitators. That's you all. All right, now, I have a little bit of time, so I'm going to talk about the next step. So I mentioned we have these apprenticeships, and one of them was a grant proposal writing apprenticeship, which is currently on hiatus because we got the grant. And the grant is the Certified CI Facilitator Training and Development, or CIFTED program. So this is a $300,000 grant from the NSF. It was meant to be 2 years. We're actually coming up on the end of our 3rd year, and I'm going to be submitting a no-cost extension again. So the PI and co-PIs, that's me, Dana Brunson from Internet 2, and Dirk Colbury from Michigan State, who leads the Cyber Ambassadors program. And you'll be hearing from a lot of Cyber Ambassadors folks during the week. I think they have 3 or maybe 4 sessions total that they're leading. So the opportunity here was, let's bring all of what we've learned about how to teach this stuff together and create a professional development certification. Now, this is not like a grad certificate or an undergrad certificate. It's not matriculated. It's informal education. So it's more like a Red Hat certified engineer or a CISSP or whatever, right? Something where you study it, you take an exam, and you are awarded a certification, right? So Sifted, and by the way, we are the #1 non-sponsored link on Google for that acronym. We are not the Canadian Centre for International Fisheries Training and Development. That used to be #1, but we kicked their butts. It's an first of its kind. It's non-matriculated. It's informal education. But I was here for the fishing. Okay. Next time, Rob. Okay, so it's not the exams are not, this is not participation. We do real exams, or we're working on them. So the idea is we have a collection of badges, which means a training module, an exam, and a scoring rubric. And then by having certain collections of badges, you get certification based on the badges you have. Okay, why don't we do a degree or a grad certificate? Well, I talked about it a little earlier. There aren't the numbers to make that work. There was an unhappy example in the mid 2000s or maybe 2010ish, I can't remember, There was a community college in Texas that created a program in HPC system administration, and it failed. And my suspicion, I don't know for a fact, but my suspicion is it failed because nobody knows what HPC is. So if you use that term, if you say high performance computing, why would anyone sign up? They have no idea what that is. They've never heard of that, right? They switched that to cloud. It still didn't work, right? Now you're seeing a lot of associate's degrees in machine learning and particularly large language models starting to pop up. And those are likely to be successful because people know what they are and there's likely to be reasonably lucrative jobs there, right? But with a population of a few thousand CI facilitators, even an individual institution is not going to be able to justify creating a degree or even a matriculated certificate program like a grad certificate, excuse me, because the uptake is going to be tiny at that institution. Remember, institutions, academic institutions, are highly localized, right? They don't typically have a big national footprint. I mean, a few do with online programs, but they're highly localized, and the population is whoever they let into their institution. And then a teeny tiny fraction of that is going to be interested in a CI facilitator degree program because who's even heard of a CI facilitator, right? How would they know what that is? So you're not going to see degree programs. You're not going to see matriculated programs. You're not going to see undergrad or grad certificates. You're not going to see any of that. It has to be done within formal education. All right, so what are our goals? From the perspective of the facilitators, training and proof of mastery, and cultivate and expand the facilitator community, right? There need to be more of us helping each other. From the perspective of CI organizations, increase the uptake of facilitation, thereby increasing the uptake of CI. And from the perspective of researchers, using research computing is hard. We talked about that already. Having someone help you is good because research computing is hard. Therefore, having someone help you improves your research productivity. Okay, so how do we do this? We determine the skills. We did, and thank you to Julie Werner who conducted this. She's, I think, on the call. We did surveys of both CI facilitators and CI organization leaders, like HPC center directors, to find out what do they think are the high priority topics. They were, by the way, there was a lot of surprises in those results in that data, and we got really good response rates, and there were a lot of surprises in there. We're also going to be um, surveying STEM researchers who use CI. But we didn't really have time to do that before we had to commit on the schedule for this year's workshop. And then for each of the relevant skills, develop a training mechanism. And for many of them, we already have that through the workshops. An exam instrument and a scoring rubric, and then pilot test that both through the workshops and through online resources. Construct subsets of badges that collectively get merit certification, test all of that, and evaluate it. So the challenges we have are what skills do facilitators need? And that's where the surveys come in really handy. How do facilitators build credibility with researchers and institutions? How do we train enough of y'all to be able to meet the need? Because the need keeps growing. How confident are we that it works? And how do we sustain it beyond the near term? Right? We do not, in this pilot project, we do not try and do multiple levels of certification, just the one. And we're not trying to meet the needs of industry because that will be way, way bigger. Right? So you can get a badge this week by participating in the intake interview practicum Wednesday mid-morning. It doesn't cost any money, just show up. Okay. And I'm running out of time, so I want to wrap this up. You are next. You need to have in your career plan that beyond being a CI facilitator, you're going to be an institutional CI leader. Now, not literally everybody needs that in their career plan, but a lot of you, we need a lot of you to plan on this. And there are both good, warm-hearted, virtuous reasons for doing this and wicked, selfish, mercenary base reasons to do it. And I believe in having both at all times for everything. The one, because then I can look myself in the mirror, and the other, because it gets me out of bed. Okay, so good, warm-hearted, virtuous reasons. You have lots of good ideas because you've got experience and observation. And if you could put your ideas to work, that would help your researchers a lot. You love helping the researchers because it's incredibly emotionally rewarding to see them succeed after hitting a speed bump that without you, they would never have been able to get past. And you know that your administration doesn't understand research computing well enough to be able to make good decisions on their own. They need your help. There's a difference between the labor mindset, I do what I'm told, and the management mindset, I tell the institution what ought to be done. We need you to adopt a management mindset from the beginning. Even when you're labor, you need to think from the perspective of management. What does my institution need? Identify a problem, formulate a solution, sell that solution up and down the chain of command, see to it that solution is implemented. It doesn't have to be you doing all the implementing. And then have it sustained so long that it becomes part of your institution's regular practice. That's when you know your success, and that's also when you know that you're a leader. Now, the wicked, selfish base reasons. You get paid better, you have more job security. The reality is, at any institution, the fraction of workers who are willing to be the adult in the room is always low. So if you're willing to be the adult in the room, you already have a leg up. Why be a national leader? Well, the good, warm-hearted virtual reason, we definitely need you. We would benefit from what you have learned. You can influence the course of research history, and getting noticed by other national leaders is great for advancing your career. Okay, so you saw this slide before, so I'm not going to belabor it. Do you have imposter syndrome? Do you ever worry that someone's going to find you out, that you really don't know what you're talking about? Then you're normal. Almost everyone has imposter syndrome. Almost all of us notice that we don't know as much as we feel like we ought to know, and that we're kind of winging it. Well, that's the reality. Everybody's winging it all the time. So it's okay to have imposter syndrome, but don't let that hold you back. And there's ways to make your mark. You can invent new good things, or you can make existing good things even better. So here's some examples from my own career. Things I invented: supercomputing in plain English, teaching non-CS people about high-performance computing. The One Oklahoma Cyber Infrastructure Initiative. By the way, I didn't invent all of these necessarily all by myself. In many cases, I was co-creator. The business model that we use for our large-scale tape archive, the virtual residency, including the various apprenticeships, the Cyber Infrastructure Leadership Academy, which is the next step after the virtual residency, and so on. And you can also make existing good things better. So the National Computational Science Institute had parallel computing workshops. I became an instructor and helped change and add and improve and make it better. The SE Education program, I ran it for a year. It was a lot of work, but I kind of put my stamp on it to make it better. Campus Champions, Dana and I, about halfway through the history of the Exceed program, Campus Champions had started a little before Exceed under TerraGrid. We came in and we made improvements and changes and put our mark on that as well, Dana Brunson and I. And, there's more and more institutions doing this. So way back in 2004, my institution joined the Coalition for Academic Scientific Computation, which to first order is sort of the de facto professional society for HPC center directors in the US. That's not really true, but that's effectively how it behaves. Back then, there were about 36 members. Now there are over 100. But on the other hand, there are 279 R1s and R2s, so there's lots of growth potential there. And get ready to be in charge, right? The youngest baby boomers are 60. The oldest baby boomers are almost 80. Gen X, that's my generation. The youngest of us is 44. The oldest is 59, just a little bit older than me. And so on down the line. Every single day, 10,000 baby boomers reach age 65. Now, they don't necessarily retire that day, but they hit that age. So again, we will be dragged kicking and screaming up the stairs. And this is the best job ever. And the reason is, every single day, you get to see the impact of of the work you do. You can see how you are helping researchers to do amazing research, how you are helping scholars and creatives. It's incredible because unlike most jobs, you immediately see the value of the work you're doing. The reality is, money doesn't make people happy. Fame doesn't make people happy. Good looks don't make people happy. What makes people happy is mattering to other people. And in this job, the best part is not only do you matter to other people, you can see that you matter to other people. Okay, there's bibliography, acknowledgments, various grants that have paid for this. And if anyone has any questions, technically I have 0 time, but we can spill over a little bit. How are the Google discussion pages best used? What should we be discussing there versus Zoom chat? I would say anything that you want us to retain and be able to look back on later. So comments and questions that you might have for others, put it in the Google chat. If you've got links, yes, links should go into the Google Docs. If you've got links, that's a good place to do them. So if you look on the workshop webpage for every session, there's a link to, it's not actually to the individual Google Doc, it's to the Google Doc folder. And then you just double click on the session and it'll pop up the Google Doc for that session. And it should be the case that everybody has permission to write on every one of those Google Docs. If you discover you don't have permission, please send me a hate mail and I will fix it. But I was very careful last night when I was setting these up to make sure that they all had sharing and editing permission turned on, including the folder, including each of the individual Google Docs. Curiosity, what does the up the stairs part of being dragged, kicking and screaming up the stairs mean? So I'm an institutional CI leader, but I also have some role as a national CI leader, for example, leading the virtual residency. But on the other hand, when the Exceed program was going into their phase 2, the second 5 years, I got a call from one of their people saying, Henry, we would like you to be in charge of the campus engagement program. And my answer was, I would like me and Dana to be in charge of the campus engagement program because I can't give you 50% of my time. Um, and even if I could, I think I'd be incompetent at it. And she actually ended up being way better at it than I was. Um, so this is the kind of thing I'm talking about. They'll come to you and say, we need you to take a national role because the need for the national capabilities, and I don't necessarily mean running a big national center, though that can be true too, but there are a whole lot of national scale capabilities. The Campus Research Computing Consortium, CARC, Campus Champions, Software Carpentries, all of these organizations, Software Carpentries is actually international, all of these organizations need people contributing. We need you contributing to these organizations. The Linux Clusters Institute, which teaches people how to be research computing system administrators, the research software engineers organizations, they all need people to participate, to volunteer, to help, to expand their capabilities, to make them better. And we need people to invent new capabilities that we haven't thought of. This is all very important. And again, as the older cohorts retire, and in some cases die off, there need to be folks who can step in to take those roles and who are prepared, who are ready to step into those roles. But then in order for them to do that, there have to be folks the next step down on the staircase to come up a step and take over for the folks who just got dragged up into the national stuff, and so on and so on and so on. Oh, thank you, Sean. Yes, the Linux Clusters Institute, which teaches how to be a cluster supercomputer system administrator, their advanced workshop is going to be in Hawaii in August. So if you're itching to have an excuse to have your boss send you to Hawaii, this is a great time to go. And Sean just put the link in the chat. And Sean, I would encourage you also to put that in the Google Doc. Right. Great question. Good. More questions. I love questions. And I have negative 4 minutes to answer them. Any more questions? All right, then let's. Well, wait, did I miss one? No. Okay, we're good. All right. So let's wrap up, and we will reconvene at quarter till the hour with effective communication. You'll be stuck with me again, but then, as I say, that's the last time you have to listen to me. So effective communication at quarter till. So we're on a break. I'm not going to shut down. Don't log out. Just stay logged in to Zoom. Go, refresh your beverage, take a bio break, check your email, come on back, and we'll pick up again at quarter till. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and stop the recording.